The words came like a hammer on marble. "You are criminalizing my community." Ilhan Omar's voice didn't shake when she said it. It never shook. Not in refugee camps where silence meant survival. Not in Minnesota's 5th District where being loud meant being heard. Not now, standing in front of the Vice President of the United States, pointing her finger at a man who sat so still he might have been carved from the same stone as the building around them. This is a witch hunt against Somali Americans. This is Islamophobia wrapped in the language of oversight. And every single person watching this needs to understand what's happening here. The Russell Senate office building was designed to intimidate. Marble columns that stretch toward ceilings so high your voice disappears into them. Mahogany panels that smell like old money and older power. Chandeliers that cost more than most Americans make in a year. It's a building that says you're small and we're permanent. But Ilhan Omar had never been particularly interested in what buildings said to her. She was standing when witnesses are supposed to sit. She was pointing when decorum says you fold your hands. She was speaking in the cadence of someone who learned early that if you don't claim your space, someone else will claim it for you. J.D. Vance watched her from the presiding officer's chair. His hands were folded on the desk. His face showed nothing. No irritation at the pointing. No reaction to the volume. No shift in posture when she called him Islamophobic. He sat the way men sit when they've spent their childhood learning to read a room for danger. When your mother's boyfriend is screaming and your mother is screaming back and the police are coming and you're 10 years old hiding in your room, you learn to be still. You learn that the person who doesn't react is the person who controls what happens next. You learn that silence is a weapon sharper than any shout. He waited 2 seconds, 3, long enough for the C-SPAN cameras to capture the contrast. Her standing, him sitting, her fury, his stillness, her accusations hanging in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Then he spoke, and when he spoke his voice carried the rhythm of southern Ohio, Appalachian at the edges, the kind of voice that sounds like it's telling you a story on a front porch rather than addressing the United States Senate. Congresswoman Omar, I appreciate your passion. Before we continue, I'd like to share something with this committee. It's not in the briefing materials. It's personal. He paused, not for drama, for memory, for the kind of recollection that requires you to reach back into places you've spent years trying to leave behind. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. Not the nice part. The part where the steel mill closed and took every good job in town with it. My mother, Beverly, was addicted to opioids. OxyContin first, then heroin when the OxyContin got too expensive or too hard to find. She cycled through rehab and relapsed so many times I stopped counting before I turned 12. You stop counting when you realize the numbers don't mean anything. When you understand that your mother promising this is the last time doesn't actually change what happens next. My father signed away his parental rights. I don't tell you that for sympathy. I tell you that as a fact, as context. By the time I was in middle school, I'd lived in so many different houses I couldn't tell you all the addresses. Different boyfriends, different evictions, different schools. The only constant in my life was my grandmother. Everyone called her Mama. Her real name was Bonnie Vance. She'd left Jackson, Kentucky when she was 13 years old. 8th grade education. No money. No family connections. Just a willingness to work in a factory and an absolute refusal to let her grandchildren end up the way her children had ended up. I wore second-hand shoes from Goodwill. I ate school lunch because it was the biggest meal I was going to get that day. I ate government cheese. I watched my town die, steel mills closing, families falling apart. People I went to elementary school with overdosing in parking lots and public bathrooms. I watched it happen. I lived inside it. I didn't read about poverty in a book, Congresswoman. I woke up in it every single morning for 18 years. He looked directly at Omar now, not with anger, with something quieter and more devastating, recognition, the look of one survivor seeing another. I'm not lecturing you from privilege. I'm asking you a question from the same place you came from poverty, from struggle, from a system that forgot about people like us. The difference between us, Congresswoman, isn't where we started. We both started at the bottom. We both knew hunger. We both knew what it feels like to be a child who doesn't know if the adults in your life will be there tomorrow. The difference between us is what we did with the chance America gave us. When this country gave me an opportunity, I put on a Marine Corps uniform and I went to Iraq. When this country gave you an opportunity, you used your platform to call the September 11th attacks some people did something. You compared the United States military to the Taliban. You authored legislation that enabled $250 million in fraud that devastated the community you claim to represent. I'm not targeting your religion. I'm not targeting your ethnicity. I'm asking you the question your own constituents are asking. What did you do with the gift of being here? The silence that followed was the kind that recalibrates everything. The kind where everyone in the room simultaneously understands that the hearing they expected is not the hearing they're going to get. 40 senators, 200 spectators, a dozen cameras, all of them realizing at once that this isn't about policy anymore. This is about something older and more fundamental. This is about two different kinds of poverty producing two different kinds of politics. This is about gratitude and grievance. This is about what you owe the country that saved your life. To understand how they got here, you have to go back to the beginning, to the morning before, to the hours when both of them still believed they knew exactly how this would end. Ilhan Omar arrived at the Russell Building at 8:15 in the morning. She was flanked by her attorney, her chief of staff, and two communications staffers who'd spent the last 72 hours building what they called, in the shorthand of political crisis management, the playbook. The playbook was simple because the playbook had always worked. When Republicans attack Ilhan Omar, the attack is always fundamentally about the same thing. Her identity. She is Muslim. She is Somali. She is an immigrant. She is a black woman. She wears a hijab. She represents a district that Republicans love to use as a symbol of everything they claim is wrong with immigration. Every attack, regardless of what it claims to be about, financial disclosures, campaign finance violations, foreign policy statements, the Feeding Our Future scandal, is at its core an identity attack. And the defense against an identity attack is an identity defense. You make the attack itself the issue. You make them defend why they're targeting you specifically. You make it about who you are rather than what you did. Her attorney, Rachel Stein, a former DOJ prosecutor who'd navigated half a dozen congressional investigations, walked Omar through the expected sequence. They'll start with Feeding Our Future, she said. They'll try to connect you to the fraud through the Meals Act, standard guilt by association. We respond with the bill was designed to feed children during a pandemic. The fraud was committed by criminals who exploited a federal program. And the suggestion that you're personally responsible for the actions of criminals is the same logic that holds every Muslim accountable for terrorism. Then they'll pivot to your public statements. Some people did something. The AIPAC tweet, the Taliban comparison, but these are old news. Every one of them has been litigated in the media for years. We don't relitigate old controversies. We redirect. This hearing is supposed to be about fraud in federal programs, not about tweets from 2019. If they want to talk about your statements, we talk about context. We talk about how your words have been consistently taken out of context by people who want to silence you. And if Vance gets personal, which he won't, Stein said with confidence, he's the vice president. He has to maintain decorum. He'll ask procedural questions. He'll let the Republican senators do the attacking. He won't engage directly because he can't afford to look like he's bullying a woman of color. Omar scrolled through her phone while Stein talked. The squad group chat was already active. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posting messages of support. Anna Presley messaging solidarity. Rashida Tlaib sharing a Twitter thread about the long history of Islamophobic rhetoric in congressional hearings. The hashtag #ProtectIlhan was climbing on social media. The fundraising emails were already drafted and ready to send. The progressive media ecosystem was primed. The machine was working. It always worked. Every Republican attack became a fundraising opportunity. Every hearing became a media tour. Every controversy became a renewal of the narrative. Refugee girl survives war, survives camps, survives Trump, survives the right-wing machine. The attacks made her stronger. That was the entire model. That was how this worked. What Omar's team had not prepared for, because it had never occurred to them to prepare for it, because no Republican had ever done it before, was an opponent who could match her poverty story with his own. Who could stand on the same ground and tell a story that was just as hard and just as real? Who could take the only weapon she'd never had countered and turn it around? They had researched Vance, of course. Yale Law School, venture capital, Peter Thiel, senator from Ohio, vice president. The profile of a man born into the Republican establishment or born into poverty and then absorbed into the establishment, which was the same thing in the end. Someone who'd written a best-selling book about poor people to make himself rich and respectable. That was the frame. Vance is a wealthy Ivy League politician who exploited his own communities, suffering for profit and power, and now has the audacity to lecture an actual refugee about struggle. What they hadn't done, or hadn't done carefully enough, was read the book itself. They knew the title, Hillbilly Elegy. They knew the criticism, that it blamed poor people for their own poverty, that it gave Republicans permission to look at struggling white communities and say it's a culture problem, not a policy problem. They didn't know the stories inside it. The mother who overdosed in the Walmart parking lot. The father who signed away his parental rights before his son could remember him. The grandmother who carried a loaded revolver in her purse and once threatened to kill a man who'd hit her daughter. The kid who showed up to Marine Corps basic training not knowing how to balance a checkbook or manage money because no one had ever taught him. They knew the narrative they'd built around Vance. They didn't know his actual story. And the story, it turned out, was the weapon. 3 blocks away, in a secure office in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, J.D. Vance sat with his chief of staff and legal counsel reviewing a folder that was notably thin. Not because they hadn't done research. They'd done extensive research, but because the folder didn't contain what you'd expect. No financial spreadsheets. No FEC filings. No complex document trails. Speaker Mike Johnson had already done that work in his own hearing months earlier. Johnson had gone through Omar's financial disclosure forms line by line, reading the $158,000 to $30 million jump into the congressional record with the clinical precision of a CPA. That ground was already taken. That battle was already won. Vance's folder contained something different: transcripts, tweets, video timestamps, the public record of Ilhan Omar's own words, not her finances, not allegations, not conspiracy theories, just things she had said on camera, on social media, in speeches she'd chosen to deliver about the country that had taken her in. She's going to play the identity card, said his chief of staff, Kevin Gallagher, a former Marine officer who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Islamophobia, xenophobia, targeting immigrants, racism, it's all she has. That's the entire defense. Make it about who she is instead of what she's done. I know, Vance said, and it's going to bounce off me like a rubber ball off a brick wall because I'm not attacking her identity. I'm not saying a single word about her religion or her ethnicity or where she was born. I'm reading her own words back to her. I'm asking her to explain what she said. That's not an attack. That's accountability. She'll say you're privileged, Gallagher said, that you can't understand what a refugee goes through, that you grew up with advantages she didn't have. Vance almost smiled. Almost. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. My mother was a drug addict. My father didn't exist. I wore second-hand clothes and ate government food and joined the Marines because I literally didn't know what else to do with my life. I am the least privileged person in that building tomorrow, and everyone in America who read my book knows it. She can call me a lot of things, but she can't call me privileged. Not credibly. He opened the folder. On the first page was a transcript of Omar's CAIR speech from March 2019. The relevant section was highlighted in yellow. CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something, and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. I enlisted because of 9/11, Vance said quietly, almost to himself. A lot of kids did. Hundreds of thousands of kids. Some of them didn't come home. Some of them came home different. And she called it "Some people did something." I'm going to read that back to her, and then I'm going to tell her about Mama. Mama Bonnie Vance left Jackson, Kentucky when she was 13 years old, 8th grade education, worked in factories her entire life, never complained about America, not once, not when the work was hard, not when money was tight, not when her own children turned to drugs. She never forgot what it was like to have nothing, never forgot that this country gave her a chance. She flew an American flag outside her house every single day. She watched the news every night and argued with the television and loved every minute of it because she understood, bone deep, the way only someone who's had nothing can understand, that the country that gave her a chance was worth defending. He closed the folder. Omar came here as a refugee. Mama came to Middletown as a hillbilly from Kentucky. Same story, different ending. I'm going to let America see both endings and decide which one they respect more. You're not going to attack her, Gallagher said, studying him. No, Vance said. I'm going to tell two stories, mine and Mama's. And the gap between those stories and her story is going to do all the work. I'm not going to call her ungrateful. I'm not going to call her anti-American. I'm going to let her own words create that impression. And I'm going to make it impossible for her to play the victim because I'm the other poor kid. I'm the one who also came from nothing. And when two people from nothing stand next to each other, you can't hide behind identity anymore. You have to defend your choices. The hearing officially began at 10 o'clock. The title was Procedural and Bureaucratic, Oversight of Federal Nutrition Programs, Examining the Feeding Our Future Fraud and Systemic Vulnerabilities in Pandemic-Era Spending. The kind of title designed to sound boring. The kind of title designed to make people think this is just another government hearing about government waste. But the people in the room knew better. The people who'd been following this story knew that Feeding Our Future was the largest pandemic fraud case in American history. $250 million. 70 people charged. More than 50 convicted. Money that was supposed to feed children during COVID stolen and laundered through shell companies and real estate purchases and wire transfers to overseas accounts. The first 2 hours were exactly what the title promised: procedural, bureaucratic, witnesses from the Department of Agriculture, the Government Accountability Office, the FBI's Minneapolis field office. They testified about the mechanics of the fraud, how organizations submitted claims for millions of meals that were never cooked, never served, never existed, how the money moved through the system, how the fraud was structured, how investigators unraveled it. The numbers were staggering, but numbers always are in congressional hearings. $250 million is an abstraction, a number so large it doesn't mean anything to most people. What mattered was the context. The organizations involved were clustered in Minneapolis's Cedar Riverside neighborhood, the heart of the Somali-American community that Omar represented. The convicted defendants were overwhelmingly Somali, though the founder of Feeding Our Future, a woman named Amy Bach, was white and had been convicted at trial. Omar listened with the practiced stillness of someone who'd been investigated before, someone who knew how to sit through testimony without showing emotion. Her attorney took notes. Her staff monitored social media, tracking the hashtags, watching the sentiment, preparing responses. The hearing was going exactly as expected, damaging but manageable. The kind of hearing that would generate headlines for a day and then fade into the background noise of congressional oversight. Then it was her turn to testify. She took her seat at the witness table and delivered an opening statement that was 7 minutes long, eloquent, and built entirely on the foundation that had sustained her entire political career. The refugee narrative, the story of survival, the story of overcoming, the story that made every attack feel like persecution. I was born in Mogadishu, Somalia. I spent 4 years of my childhood in a refugee camp in Kenya. I came to this country when I was 12 years old. I spoke no English. I had nothing. I have been investigated, attacked, threatened, and vilified since the day I took office in Congress. And I am here today because the majority party has decided, once again, to use the suffering of my community as a political weapon, to use this committee, this hearing room, this platform, to criminalize an entire people, because doing so serves a political narrative. She looked directly at Vance. Mr. Vice President, you sit in that chair, a man born with every advantage this country offers, and you dare to use this committee to target a refugee, an immigrant, a Muslim woman, a black woman, because doing so serves your political agenda. This hearing is not about fraud. This hearing is about fear. Fear of immigrants, fear of Muslims, fear of a woman who refuses to be silent in halls that were built for people who look like you. The gallery stirred. Progressive activists in the back rows nodded. A few even quietly applauded before the chairman gavelled them to silence. Omar's staff exchanged satisfied glances. The playbook was working. She'd framed the hearing as an identity attack before a single substantive question had been asked. She'd put Vance on the defensive, made him the oppressor, made herself the victim. It was textbook. Vance waited. He let the statement settle, let the applause die, let the room go quiet again. He sat the way his grandmother had taught him to sit when things got loud, still, patient, letting silence do the work that shouting never could. "Congresswoman," he said finally, his voice carrying that same Appalachian warmth, that same front porch storytelling quality, "I need to correct something you said. You described me as a man born with every advantage. I want to make sure the record is accurate, because what you said isn't true, and I think it's important that everyone here understands the actual facts. I was born in Middletown, Ohio, not the good part of Middletown, not the part where doctors and lawyers lived, the part where the Armco steel mill used to employ half the town before it closed and took the entire local economy with it. My mother, Beverly Vance, was addicted to prescription opioids and heroin. She didn't go to rehab once or twice. She went 18 times. I know because I counted. When you're a kid and your mother keeps disappearing into treatment facilities and then coming back and then disappearing again, you count. You count because counting makes you feel like there's a pattern, like maybe this time is different. It never was. My biological father signed away his parental rights. I don't remember him. I have no memory of him being present in my life. By the time I was in middle school I had lived in, I'm trying to remember exactly 4 or 5 different houses, depending on which boyfriend my mother was with at the time, depending on which eviction we were running from. The only constant, the only stable adult in my entire childhood was my grandmother, Bonnie Vance. Everyone called her Mama. She'd come to Middletown from Jackson, Kentucky when she was 13 years old. 8th grade education. No money, no connections, no family wealth, just a willingness to work in a factory and an absolute determination to keep her grandchildren safe. I wore shoes from Goodwill. I wore clothes from Goodwill. I ate school lunch because it was the biggest meal I was going to get that day. I ate government cheese. I qualified for free lunch programs. I watched my entire town collapse, steel mills closing, families falling apart, friends I grew up with dying from overdoses in parking lots and bathrooms. I didn't read about the opioid epidemic in a newspaper, Congresswoman. I watched it destroy my family. I watched it destroy my community. I lived inside it every single day. I joined the United States Marine Corps in 2003. I was 18 years old. I joined because I didn't know how to fill out a college application, because no one in my family had ever gone to college, because the recruiter said the Marines would teach me how to be an adult, and he was right. The Marines gave me structure. They gave me discipline. They gave me a future. He paused, adjusted his microphone slightly. The gesture was deliberate, a storyteller's timing. So when you say I was born with every advantage, Congresswoman, with all due respect for everything you survived as a child, you're talking to someone who also survived. Different country, same poverty, same broken adults, same fear. Same uncertainty about whether tomorrow would be better or worse than today. The difference between us isn't where we started. We both started at the bottom. The difference is what we chose to do with the chance America gave us. The room shifted, not dramatically, not with gasps or applause, but with the quiet recalibration of understanding. Omar had walked into this hearing as the underdog, the refugee versus the vice president, the powerless versus the powerful, the woman of color versus the white man in the establishment. In 90 seconds, Vance had collapsed that entire frame. He wasn't the powerful man attacking the vulnerable woman. He wasn't the privileged Ivy League politician lecturing the refugee. He was the other poor kid, the one from the other side of the world's poverty, the one asking a question that had nothing to do with identity and everything to do with choices. Omar's attorney wrote something on her legal pad and slid it across the table. Omar glanced at it, didn't respond to it. Her rhythm had changed. She was recalibrating in real time. Mr. Vice President, she said, her voice tighter now, more controlled, your personal story is compelling. I don't diminish what you went through as a child, but it doesn't change the fact that this hearing is being used to target my community, to criminalize Muslim Americans, to perpetuate Islamophobic narratives about fraud and terrorism. Congresswoman Vance said, and his voice remained exactly the same, still warm, still measured, still telling a story rather than delivering an attack. I'd like to discuss some of the things you've said during your time in Congress. Not what other people have said about you, not rumors or conspiracy theories. What you've said, your words, on the record. He opened his folder to the first tab. On March 23, 2019, you gave a speech at a fundraising event for the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. In that speech, you discussed the founding of CAIR and its connection to the September 11th attacks. Your exact words, and I'm reading from the transcript, were CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something, and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He looked up from the page. Some people did something. 2,977 people died on September 11, 2001. Firefighters ran upstairs, they knew they wouldn't come back down. Office workers called their families from burning buildings to say goodbye. Passengers on Flight 93 stormed the cockpit and crashed the plane into a field in Pennsylvania because they decided they would rather die fighting than die waiting. The towers came down. The Pentagon burned. A field became a graveyard. And you described it as some people did something. Congresswoman, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 2003. I was 18 years old. I enlisted because of what happened on September 11th. The way hundreds of thousands of young Americans enlisted because of what happened on September 11th. We didn't enlist for money. We didn't enlist because we needed the education benefits, though the GI Bill changed my life. We enlisted because some people did something to our country and we wanted to do something back. We wanted to serve. We wanted to defend. We wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. I went to Iraq. I was a combat correspondent with the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing, stationed at Al-Assad Air Base. I wasn't infantry. I wasn't special forces. I carried an M16 rifle and a camera, and I wrote stories about the Marines I served with. Some of those Marines went to places I didn't go. Some of them fought in battles I didn't fight. Some of them didn't come home. And every single one of them enlisted for the same reason I did. Because of what happened on September 11th. Not because some people did something. Because terrorists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans, and we decided that deserved a response. You have every right to criticize American foreign policy. I exercise that right myself. I've said publicly that the Iraq War was a mistake. I've been critical of many aspects of the war on terror. Dissent is patriotic. Disagreement is healthy. But when you describe the worst attack in American history, the reason my friends went to war, the reason some of them didn't come home, as some people did something, you're not dissenting. You're diminishing. You're reducing the murder of nearly 3,000 people to a footnote in your own narrative about civil liberties. Omar leaned forward, her lawyer's hand moving toward her arm in warning. I was talking about the impact on Muslim American civil liberties after 9/11. The surveillance, the profiling, the discrimination, the loss of rights, that's what I was addressing. Then say that, Vance said, his voice still level, still calm. Say the 9/11 attacks were horrific and the response unfairly targeted Muslim Americans. I would agree with that statement. I would support that statement. Many Americans would. But that's not what you said. You said some people did something. You chose those specific words. And the families of 2,977 people heard you choose them. He turned to the next tab in his folder. June 7, 2021. You posted a statement on Twitter. I'm going to read it exactly as it appeared. We must have the same level of accountability and justice for all victims of crimes against humanity. We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. He set the paper down and looked at her. You put the United States of America in the same sentence as Hamas and the Taliban. The country that took you in when you were 12 years old. The country that gave you citizenship, education, safety, opportunity, a seat in Congress. You placed it alongside terrorist organizations that stone women, that execute homosexuals, that ban girls from attending school, that throw acid in the faces of women who try to learn to read. I served in the Marine Corps with men and women who fought the Taliban, who carried wounded Marines out of firefights with the Taliban, who came home missing limbs because of IEDs planted by the Taliban, who came home with traumatic brain injuries, who came home with PTSD, who didn't come home at all. And you told the world that their country, the country they bled for, commits the same unthinkable atrocities as the people they were fighting. 12 members of your own party condemned that statement, Congresswoman. Not Republicans, Democrats, Jewish Democrats who found the moral equivalence offensive and dangerous. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, your own speaker, issued a public statement saying that your comparison, and I'm quoting directly, foments prejudice. Your own speaker, your own party. And you didn't apologize, you clarified. And there's a difference between apologizing and clarifying. Apologizing means you understand what you did wrong and you regret it. Clarifying means you think the problem is that people misunderstood you. But they didn't misunderstand you, Congresswoman. They read your words. United States, Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, Taliban. Same sentence. Same moral framework. We understood perfectly. Omar's composure was holding, but her body language had changed. She was no longer performing the measured outrage of a prepared witness. She was reacting, and in a congressional hearing, reaction is the beginning of losing. You are taking my words out of context, she said, and her voice had an edge now, a sharpness that hadn't been there before, to serve a political narrative, to demonize me, to demonize my community. I'm reading your words in full, Congresswoman, Vance said, and his voice had not changed at all, still patient, still warm, still telling a story. I'm not editing. I'm not paraphrasing. I'm not adding commentary. I'm reading what you wrote on your official Twitter account in your own voice for millions of people to see. If the context changes the meaning, please provide it. I'm happy to listen. She didn't provide it, because there was no context that made the sentence read differently. United States, Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, Taliban. The words were the words. The meaning was the meaning. Vance continued, and his voice remained exactly the same. That steady Appalachian cadence, the voice of someone telling a story they'd thought about for a very long time. February 2019. You tweeted that congressional support for Israel was, and I'm quoting, all about the Benjamin's baby. When a journalist asked who you were referring to, you responded with a single word, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. The implication that Jewish money controls American politics is one of the oldest and most destructive anti-Semitic tropes in existence. It has been used for centuries to justify persecution, exclusion, violence against Jewish people. The idea that Jews use money to secretly control governments. It's not new. It's not original. It's ancient hatred dressed in modern language. The House of Representatives voted 407 to 23 to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism in response to your statement. 407 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, found your words sufficiently troubling to merit a formal condemnation. Your own leadership, Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, Majority Whip Hoyer, publicly called on you to apologize. Not Republicans. Your own Democratic leadership. You did apologize, to your credit. But then, 2 years later, you were removed from the House Foreign Affairs Committee by a vote of 218 to 211. Not because of your religion. Not because of your ethnicity. Not because you're an immigrant. Because of a pattern of statements that your own colleagues, including many Democrats, found unacceptable for someone serving on a committee that deals with sensitive foreign policy issues. Congresswoman, you demand rightly that Americans take Islamophobia seriously. I take it seriously. It is real. It is harmful. It is destructive. Muslim Americans deserve to live without fear and without prejudice. But you cannot demand tolerance for yourself while trafficking in prejudice against others. You cannot ask America to protect your community while you deploy rhetoric that harms the Jewish community. Tolerance is not a one-way street. Respect is not a one-way street. Omar's attorney placed a hand on her arm, a clear signal, don't respond. Let it pass. Move to the next topic, but Vance was already moving. Now I want to talk about why we're actually in this room today. Not your tweets from years ago. Not your speeches. The $250 million. He pulled a document from his folder. A timeline. Dates, dollar amounts, names, all drawn from federal court records and Department of Justice public filings. In 2020, you authored the Meals Act, the Maximizing Efficiency and Access to Lunches for Students Act. The purpose was to expand access to child nutrition programs during the COVID-19 pandemic. The goal was good. Feeding children during a crisis is something every member of Congress should support. No one disputes that the intent was good, but the bill reduced oversight requirements. It expanded the number of organizations that could access federal food funding without the verification processes that had previously been in place. It streamlined the application process. It reduced documentation requirements. Critics warned at the time, and this is in the congressional record, that reducing safeguards during a pandemic, when billions of dollars were flowing through the system with minimal oversight, could create opportunities for fraud. You dismissed those concerns. You pushed the bill forward. What happened next is now the subject of the largest pandemic fraud prosecution in American history. Feeding Our Future, a nonprofit organization operating in your district in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, the heart of the Somali American community you represent. They submitted claims for millions of meals that were never cooked, never served, never existed. The money, $250 million, was stolen, laundered through shell companies, used to purchase luxury cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, used to buy real estate, used to buy jewelry, used to fund lavish lifestyles. $250 million stolen from a program designed to feed hungry children during a pandemic. More than 70 people have been charged. More than 50 have been convicted. Federal prosecutors have called it the largest pandemic fraud case in American history. The majority of those charged are members of the Somali American community in Minneapolis, the community you claim to protect, the community you claim to represent. Some of the convicted defendants donated to your campaign. You returned the money after the indictments became public, after it became a political liability. And in December of last year, the Treasury Department announced an investigation into whether any of the stolen funds were channeled to Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Somalia, a designated terrorist organization. He let that sentence hang in the air. Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, Somalia, the country Omar had fled as a child, the country whose civil war had created the refugee crisis that brought her to America. The possibility, still under investigation, not yet proven, that money stolen from a program she authored might have funded the same kind of violence she had escaped. When CBS News asked you about the potential terrorism connection, you said, and I'm quoting your exact words, "Any link between the alleged fraud and terrorism would be a failure of the FBI." A failure of the FBI. $250 million stolen from a program you authored in your district by members of your community. And your response was to blame the FBI, not to express outrage that children's food money was stolen, not to express concern that your legislation might have been exploited, not to demand accountability from the people who committed the fraud. You blamed the FBI. Congresswoman, when I was in Iraq, we had a saying among the Marines: every dollar we lose is a bullet someone else buys. If even a fraction of that $250 million reached Al-Shabaab, then a program designed to feed American children during a pandemic helped fund an organization that murders African children, that recruits child soldiers, that commits atrocities across East Africa. And the congresswoman who authored that program looked at a camera and said it was the FBI's fault for not catching it. Omar broke, not the way politicians usually break, with silence or stammering or a lawyer's intervention. She broke the way she always broke, forward, into the fight, voice rising, body language shifting from defense to offense. This is racist. This is Islamophobic. You are sitting in that chair using the power of the vice presidency to target a Muslim woman, a black woman, an immigrant, a refugee, because you cannot accept that someone like me has a voice in this government. You are criminalizing my entire community. You are demonizing immigrants. And you, a man who wrote an entire book about how poor white people deserve sympathy and second chances, you have the audacity to sit there and lecture me, a refugee who survived war, about gratitude. The hearing room crackled with tension. Democratic senators shifted uncomfortably. The accusation of racism, delivered directly to the vice president, on camera, in a formal congressional hearing. It was the political equivalent of throwing a grenade with the pin pulled. Vance didn't flinch. He didn't lean back. He didn't tense. He sat exactly the way he'd been sitting, still, patient, waiting. The way he'd learned to wait in Middletown when the shouting started, because storms always pass. And the person still standing when the storm passes is the person who didn't try to shout over the thunder. When the echo of her voice faded, when the room went quiet again, he spoke, and his voice carried that same Appalachian warmth, like heat returning to a room after someone closes a door against the cold. Congresswoman, let me tell you about someone. He wasn't reading from his folder anymore. He was speaking from memory, from the place in his chest where the story lived permanently. Her name was Bonnie Vance. Everyone called her Mama. She was born in Jackson, Kentucky, in the hollers of eastern Appalachia. The kind of place where roads were dirt and houses didn't have indoor plumbing and the only industry was coal mining and the only way out was to leave. She left when she was 13 years old, walked out of those hills with nothing. No money, no high school diploma, no 8th grade diploma even, no family connections, no plan, just a willingness to work. She got to Middletown, Ohio, and she got a job in a factory. She married a man who drank too much. She raised children who struggled with addiction. She raised a grandson who didn't know how to fill out a college application or balance a checkbook or do any of the things middle-class kids learn from their parents. She was a refugee congresswoman, not from a war zone, from poverty, from a place America had forgotten, from a place where people were dying from lack of opportunity and lack of hope. And she came to Middletown the same way you came to Minneapolis, with nothing, hoping this country would give her a chance. It did. It gave her a factory job that paid enough to rent a small house. It gave her public schools for her children and grandchildren. It gave her the right to vote, the freedom to say whatever she wanted about the government without being arrested or silenced or punished. It gave her a life, and you know what she did with that chance. She said thank you every single day, not to a politician, not to a political party, to the country. She flew an American flag outside her house every day of her life. She watched the news every night and argued with the television and loved every minute of it because she knew in her bones, the way only someone who's had nothing can know, that the country that gave her a chance was extraordinary. Not perfect, not without flaws, not without problems, but extraordinary. Because it took a hillbilly girl from Kentucky with an 8th grade education and gave her a life, gave her dignity, gave her opportunity, gave her grandchildren a future. She never sat in Congress. She never gave speeches. She never had a Twitter account. She never wrote op-eds or appeared on cable news. She died in 2005 while I was deployed to Iraq, and I didn't get to say goodbye. But if she were sitting in this room today, Congresswoman, I know exactly what she would say to you. She would say this country saved your life. Act like it. The hearing room was absolutely silent. The silence of 50 people simultaneously understanding they were no longer watching a policy hearing about federal nutrition programs. They were watching two American stories collide: Middletown and Mogadishu, Appalachia and East Africa, the grandson of a hillbilly and the daughter of a Somali civil servant who fled a war. And the collision was not about policy or party or identity politics. It was about something older and simpler and more fundamental. It was about whether the right response to being saved is gratitude or grievance. You and I both came from nothing, Vance said, and his voice was quieter now, more personal, as if he were talking to just her instead of to a room full of senators and cameras. We both know what hunger feels like. We both know what it's like to be a child who doesn't know if the adults will be there tomorrow. We both got a chance that billions of people on this earth will never get. A chance to escape, a chance to build, a chance to become something. I put on a uniform. I went to Iraq. I came home. I used the GI Bill to go to college, then law school. I wrote a book about the place I came from, not to tear it down, but to understand it, to explain it, to show that people from places like Middletown deserve the same respect, and understanding that people from every other struggling community deserve. And every single morning I wake up grateful. Genuinely, deeply grateful that I live in the only country on earth that would give a kid from Middletown, Ohio, a kid with a drug-addicted mother and an absent father in second-hand shoes, the chance to become Vice President of the United States. You came here when you were 12 years old with nothing. This country gave you safety when Somalia couldn't, gave you citizenship when you were stateless, gave you education when you couldn't speak English, gave you the right to vote, the right to run for office, and a seat in the United States Congress. And from that seat, you called the worst terrorist attack on American soil some people did something. You compared the United States military to the Taliban. You deployed anti-Semitic rhetoric that 407 of your colleagues condemned. You authored legislation that created a $250 million fraud pipeline in your own community. And when investigators began looking into whether that money funded terrorism in the country you fled, you blamed the FBI. Congresswoman, I am not questioning your right to be here. You are an American citizen. You were duly elected by the people of Minnesota's 5th District. Your seat in Congress is yours. I am not questioning your religion. Islam is a great faith and Muslim Americans are an essential part of the fabric of this nation. I am questioning what you did with the gift of being here. Because America gave us both a gift, the same gift, the gift of a second chance, the gift of opportunity, the gift of freedom. And the question this hearing asks, the question your constituents are asking, the question the families of 9/11 victims are asking, the question that Marine veteran sitting in the third row of this gallery is asking, is whether you received that gift with gratitude or with contempt. America doesn't demand gratitude. It never has. You can criticize this country from morning until night. That's your right. That's one of the things that makes this country worth defending. But there is a line between criticism and contempt, between disagreement and disrespect, between policy debate and moral equivalence. And when you describe the murder of nearly 3,000 people as something, when you equate the United States military with the Taliban, when a program you wrote is exploited for $250 million, and you blame the investigators instead of the criminals, you have crossed that line. And the saddest part, Congresswoman, is that the people who pay the price aren't you. You'll fundraise off this hearing. You'll do cable news interviews. You'll tweet about Islamophobia and your base will rally and nothing will change for you. The people who pay the price are the Somali Americans in Cedar Riverside who came here for the same reason you did, for safety, for opportunity, for a chance, and who are now associated with a $250 million fraud they had nothing to do with. The people who pay the price are Muslim Americans who wake up every day grateful to live in a country that protects their right to worship freely, who work hard, who contribute, who love this country, and who cringe every time you make a statement that confirms every negative stereotype their neighbors already have. The people who pay the price are immigrants from Vietnam, from Cuba, from Nigeria, from Mexico, from every corner of the world, who took the citizenship oath with tears in their eyes because they remembered what they left behind, who know what it means to be given a second chance, and who watch you take that same oath and wonder if you remember any of it at all. He looked at her for the last time. Two people who grew up with nothing, two people who were given everything by the same country. One said thank you. One said some people did something. I yield to the committee. Omar stood. Her attorney reached for her arm. She pulled away. You don't get to tell an immigrant how to feel about this country, she said, and her voice was shaking now, not with fear but with rage. You don't get to weaponize your poverty against mine. You don't get to use your grandmother's story to silence a refugee. I have fought for my community since the day I arrived in this country, and I will not be lectured by a man who wrote a book blaming poor people for being poor and then profited from it. Vance's response was calm and devastating. Congresswoman, I'm not telling you how to feel. I'm reading what you said. Your words, on your Twitter account, in your speeches, in legislation you authored. I didn't write your tweets. I didn't write the Meals Act. I didn't make the comparison to the Taliban. You did. And the American people can decide for themselves what those words say about your relationship with the country that saved your life." The chairman gavelled the hearing to a close. Omar gathered her papers, though she hadn't looked at them once during her testimony, and walked out of the hearing room without stopping for the cameras that lined the hallway. Her staff followed. Her attorney followed. The corridor was full of reporters shouting questions, but she turned left and kept walking, and for the first time in her congressional career, Ilhan Omar had nothing to say to the press. The clip traveled the way all clips travel now, in fragments, each fragment optimized for a different audience, each fragment engineered for maximum emotional impact. The first fragment was the mama story. 63 seconds. Vance describing his grandmother leaving Kentucky at 13, working in factories, flying the American flag, saying thank you every day. Someone found a photograph of Bonnie Vance's house in Middletown. Small, white siding American flag hanging from the porch. The photograph was shared on social media alongside Omar's "Some People Did Something" clip. No commentary. The juxtaposition was the commentary. The contrast was the argument. The second fragment was the closing line. "America doesn't ask for gratitude, but it deserves better than contempt." 14 words. 62 million views in 48 hours. It was printed on T-shirts, quoted in church sermons, painted on a mural outside a VFW hall in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It became, for a brief and intense period of the American attention cycle, the most repeated sentence in the country. The third fragment, the one that did damage Omar's team hadn't anticipated, the one that couldn't be neutralized by the standard playbook, was the response from immigrants themselves. It started with a Vietnamese-American woman in Orange County, California. She was 71 years old. Her name was Linh Nguyen. She had come to America in 1979 after the fall of Saigon in a fishing boat with 37 other people. She recorded a 60-second video on her phone. She spoke with an accent and tears in her eyes. "I know what it means to be a refugee. I spent 3 weeks on the ocean in a boat. We had no food. We had no clean water. People died on that boat. Children died. My sister died. America took us in. America saved my family. When that woman in Congress says some people did something, she does not speak for me. She does not speak for any refugee I know. We are grateful. We will always be grateful." The video was viewed 14 million times in 3 days. A Cuban-American professor at Florida International University, whose parents fled Castro in 1962, wrote an op-ed that was syndicated in 40 newspapers. "My mother kissed the ground at Miami International Airport. She told me that story every year on the anniversary of our arrival. She kissed the ground because she knew what we had left behind and what America had given us. Gratitude was not optional in our house. It was the foundation of everything we did. It was how we understood ourselves as Americans." A Nigerian-American surgeon in Houston posted on social media. "I took the citizenship oath in 2009. I cried, not because I was sad, because I remembered the village I came from in Nigeria, where the clinic had no electricity and children died of malaria and tuberculosis, diseases that cost $4 to cure in America. I cried because I was thankful, because I understood what I had been given." She took the same oath I did. I wonder if she cried. I wonder if she felt anything at all. A Gold Star mother from New Jersey, whose son had enlisted in the Marines after September 11th and died in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, at age 22, gave an interview to a local news station. She held a photograph of her son in his dress blues. She said one sentence that was shorter and more devastating than anything said in the hearing room. "My boy died because of what some people did. He was 22 years old." She called his reason for serving something. The immigrant response became its own phenomenon. Not organized, not coordinated, not funded by any political operation. It came from Vietnamese and Cuban and Nigerian and Filipino and Mexican and Indian and Haitian and Ethiopian Americans who had one thing in common. They remembered what they had left behind. They were grateful for what they had found. And they were furious, not at Vance, not at Republicans, but at the idea that Ilhan Omar spoke for them. That her contempt was their contempt. That her grievance was their grievance. "She makes us look ungrateful," said a Somali-American shopkeeper in Cedar Riverside, Omar's own neighborhood, 2 blocks from the Feeding Our Future offices that were now shuttered and padlocked by federal authorities. "We are not ungrateful. We came here because we love this country. She came here and she forgot why." Omar held a press conference 4 hours after the hearing. She was flanked by 3 squad members: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and 2 civil rights attorneys. She called the hearing the most Islamophobic, xenophobic, racist display of hatred I have witnessed in my time in Congress. She called Vance a man who wrote a book blaming poor people for their own poverty, and now uses the vice presidency to bully immigrants and Muslims. She called the mama story emotional manipulation, designed to obscure the fact that this administration is systematically targeting Muslim communities across America. The statement was factually precise in the way political statements always are when the underlying facts are indefensible. She addressed the framing. She addressed the process. She addressed the politics. She did not address some people did something. She did not address the Taliban comparison. She did not address the $250 million. She did not address the immigrant responses. She did not address Mama. And by the time the press conference aired on cable news, 60 million people had already watched the Mama clip on social media, which meant 60 million people noticed exactly what she didn't say. The Islamophobia defense encountered a structural problem it had never encountered before. The man on the other side wasn't a wealthy Yale-educated Republican in an expensive suit making abstract arguments about values. He was, or he had been, a poor kid from Middletown, Ohio, who wore Goodwill shoes and ate government cheese and joined the Marines because he didn't know what else to do. He had deployed to a war zone. He had used the GI Bill. He had climbed out of poverty the same way immigrants climb out of poverty, by working, by serving, by refusing to quit, by being grateful for the chance. And when he spoke about gratitude, he spoke from the same place Omar spoke from when she talked about surviving, from experience, from memory, from scars that don't heal. You can call a rich man's patriotism privilege. You can call a powerful man's gratitude performance. You can dismiss their words as the comfortable rhetoric of people who have never struggled. But when a man tells you his mother was a heroin addict and his father abandoned him and he wore second-hand shoes, and he joined the Marines and he went to war and he thanks America anyway, you cannot call that privilege. You can only call it a choice. And the choice is what the hearing was ultimately about. In the weeks that followed, the word ungrateful attached itself to Ilhan Omar the way certain words attach themselves to certain politicians and never let go. The way emails attached to Hillary Clinton. The way weapons of mass destruction attached to Iraq. Not as a proven fact, not as something she'd said about herself, but as a frame, a lens, a way of interpreting everything she said and did going forward. It wasn't a word Vance had used. He was too disciplined for that, too careful. He had used contempt, which was more precise and harder to refute. But the public heard contempt and translated it into the simpler, sharper word, ungrateful. And the word stuck because it connected to something real. The gap between what America had given Ilhan Omar and what she had given back. Between the opportunity she'd received and the way she'd chosen to use it. She entered the hearing room as a refugee who had survived everything. War, camps, poverty, displacement, Trump, the right-wing machine. She left as a woman who had been given everything and thanked no one. Not because Vance had attacked her. Not because he had insulted her religion or her ethnicity or her community. But because he had told 2 stories, his and his grandmother's, and placed them next to hers, and let America see the difference. 2 kinds of poverty, 2 kinds of struggle, 2 chances given by the same country. 1 person who said thank you every day. 1 person who said some people did something. 1 flag on a porch in Middletown, Ohio. 1 tweet that reduced 3,000 deaths to something. And a country watching the way countries always watch when the question isn't about policy or politics, but about something deeper and older and more fundamental. About what you owe, the place that saved your life. About whether the right response to being given a second chance is gratitude or grievance. Bonnie Vance would have known the answer. She always did. She flew that flag every single day until the day she died. Never complained. Never forgot where she came from. never forgot what America had given her. A hillbilly girl from Kentucky with an 8th-grade education who understood something that a congresswoman from Somalia with a degree and a platform and a national following apparently didn't. That when someone saves your life, you say thank you. And you act like you mean it. If you found this story powerful, if it made you think about gratitude and opportunity and what we owe each other as Americans, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because these stories matter. These questions matter. And the answers we give shape the country we become. 2 kids from nothing. 2 chances from the same country. 2 very different choices about what to do with the gift. America is watching. America is always watching. And America remembers who says thank you and who looks away.